Ghost Train by Linda Anderson, illustrated by Phil Huling. "James," Grandpa said to me one day, "come here, I want to ask you something." He looked around the living room and then waved for me to come over to where he was sitting in his old wooden rocking chair. As I got closer to him, I could smell the pungent mix of cigar smoke and the fruity aftershave he insisted on slapping all over his face. His dark, watery eyes were wide with excitement. "Is it April 26th yet? I don't want to miss the train." "What train, Grandpa? We aren't going anywhere." "You know what I'm talking about," he said urgently. "President Lincoln's funeral train." I smiled. "Grandpa, you know Lincoln died over 50 years ago. This is 1918. His funeral train is long gone." "You don't need to tell me when President Lincoln died, young man," he said indignantly. "I saw his funeral train when it came to Albany, and I saw him lying in state in the Capitol. I'm talking about the train that has come through town every April since then." "You mean the Lincoln ghost train?" I almost laughed out loud, but quickly stopped myself. I had grown up hearing people talk about a ghost train that rolls through Albany every year on the anniversary of the day Lincoln's funeral train visited, but I had never heard Grandpa mention it before. "I only saw it once, when Grandma was with me. We went many other times, but never saw it again." "How come you never told me you and Grandma saw the ghost train, Grandpa?" "We never told you?" He looked confused. "I thought we told everyone." "No, I've never heard that story. Did Ma and Pa see it too?" "Oh, they never saw it, James. Only me and Grandma saw it that one time. We were lucky because some people never see it at all." I decided to humor him. "What did the train look like?" Grandpa's eyes lit up. "It might be a ghost train, but it looked as real to me as you do sitting there. Oh, it was a sight to see, James. It was a warm spring night, but the air suddenly got so cold that Grandma and I could see our breath right in front of our faces." He stared into the distance, as if he was seeing something that wasn't in the room. "It got real quiet, and then we saw the blue and white lights on the train coming straight at us. You must have been scared, Grandpa." He snorted in disgust. "It's a ghost train, James. It can't hurt anyone." When we got home that night, I saw that my watch had stopped for 6 minutes. He peered around the living room as if Ma might be listening, even though she was at work. "I want you to see it too, James, before I die," he whispered. "But how do you know I'll see the train this time, Grandpa? You just said that lots of people don't ever see it." Grandpa drew himself up in his chair and stared angrily at me, his bottom lip trembling. "You sure won't see it sitting around here, James," he said in a quivering voice. "You won't know until you try. You'll take me to the tracks at the right time, won't you?" "Sure, I'll take you, Grandpa. What else could I say?" I was hoping he would forget all about it. "Don't you tell your Ma what we're planning to do. She thinks I'm nutty already." "She doesn't think you're nutty, Grandpa. What makes you say that?" His eyes opened wide in fury. "Because she treats me like a child. Because she made me leave my own house to be watched over like a baby." No, I said quickly, although I knew better. "She thought you were lonely living all by yourself after Grandma died." He laughed and lit his cigar. "I've never been lonely a day in my life, even after your Grandma died. Didn't your Ma sell my house? What did she do with my money?" I didn't like where the conversation was going. "Ma put it in the bank for you, Grandpa. She told you that." His face cleared. "Oh, yes, I forgot. Your Ma's a good girl, James. Where is she? I never see her anymore." "Remember, she told you she started working in the factory. She's there now." "She's working in a factory? What's wrong with your father? Why isn't he here working instead of making your Ma go off to do a man's job?" "He went to war, Grandpa." At that, my throat got foggy, and I couldn't continue. "Another war? Why is there always another war? I fought in the Civil War, you know. I made Sergeant First Class. You sure it's not April?" I cleared my throat loudly. "Yes, Grandpa. There's still snow on the ground." We both looked out the window to see huge mounds of dirty snow piled up on both sides of the street. "We've gotten snow in April before." "I know, but it's still January, Grandpa." Grandpa sighed and shook his head sadly, like I had something to do with what month it was. He sat back in his rocking chair and took a long drag on his cigar. "Time sure passes slowly in your house, James. Make sure you let me know when it's April 26th. "There's nothing really wrong with Grandpa," Ma told me when he first came to live with us last summer. "It's just that sometimes he forgets things. I thought of the time when he was still living in his house and he forgot he was cooking eggs. The heat from the stove burnt a hole right through the frying pan. It was lucky he saw what was going on before the whole house went up in flames. Ma brought him to live with us right after she saw the burnt pan." Grandpa spent so much of his time dozing in the rocking chair. He'd stare out the window for a while, and then his head would fall back against the chair and his mouth would fall open. Soon he'd be snoring in loud, gasping breaths. "Should I wake him up?" I asked after I saw him do this a couple times. "No," Ma answered. "He'll be awake soon enough, and I'm sure he's having nice dreams." I wasn't so sure about that because sometimes Grandpa would cry out in his sleep as if something was scaring him. "He just needs a little extra help," Ma said, so I stayed with him after school when she worked the second shift at the munitions factory and didn't get home until midnight. It wasn't too bad, and I wanted to help Ma out since Pa was at war, but I missed going to my friends' houses after school. One of my friends, Billy, came over to the house sometimes. We usually found something fun to do, but once the snow came we couldn't play ball and we got bored playing cards. One day I told Billy about Grandpa and the Lincoln ghost train. "Wow," he exclaimed. "Those old folk really think they see the train. My grandpa swore he saw it too. He said he saw skeleton soldiers wearing blue uniforms flying around the train carrying their coffins on their backs." I hadn't heard that part before. Grandpa wants me to take him this year so I can see it before he dies. He won't be the only one there. A few people still go to the tracks to wait for the ghost train. I used to go with my grandpa before he died. It was fun. Did you ever see anything? No, but my grandpa was happy and we took him anyway. Why don't we take your grandpa? We're going to take him to the train station to wait for an imaginary train? I asked incredulously. Billy thought for a minute. Maybe he'll think he sees it. Does he see things that aren't there? I thought of Grandpa seeing the ghost train in our living room, or maybe he was just remembering seeing it. I'm not sure, I said. Maybe we can pretend we see it. He won't know the difference. I looked over at Grandpa, who was snoring away in his rocking chair. I don't know. Maybe he'll forget about the whole thing. But that didn't happen. The weather slowly got warmer, and the mounds of dirty snow melted into pools of dirty water. Grandpa asked me almost every day if it was April 26th. Not yet, Grandpa, I would say, but it's coming soon. Not soon enough, he muttered one day. It's like time has stopped in your house. Did I tell you that the clocks stopped when the ghost train came through? Yes, you did, I said wearily. You wouldn't be trying to put one over on me, would you, James? What do you mean, Grandpa? I mean pretending that we're going and then telling me that the day passed already? No, I wouldn't do that, I said, although the thought had occurred to me. Promise me then. Promise on your grandmother's grave that you will take me. This was serious, and I promised that I would take him when the time came. I couldn't get out of it now. Today's April 26th, Grandpa, I told him after Ma went to work that day. He was sitting in his rocking chair staring out the window. When he heard the news, he got up so fast that he almost fell onto the floor. Make it snappy, James. It's time to go. Careful, Grandpa. Let me give you a hand. We have plenty of time. I have to get something first. He went to his bedroom and returned wearing his tattered blue Civil War cap. His curly gray hair stuck out from under it. Are you planning to wear that? I thought he looked foolish, and I didn't want anyone making fun of him. Of course, James. It's in honor of President Lincoln. I sighed. Just sit down again, Grandpa. We're going very soon. A little while later, Billy appeared at the back door. Guess what? He whispered. He couldn't stop grinning. You don't have to whisper. He can't hear you from the living room. Mary and Helen will be coming with us. What? You told them we're going to see the ghost train? Why did you do that? So that they'd come with us. What else? Girls love spooky stuff. This was terrible news. I didn't want anyone else to know that Grandpa was nutty, but there was a way out. They can't go with us, I said. Their parents won't let them come without a chaperone. I already thought of that, Billy said triumphantly. Your grandpa will be the chaperone. Their parents don't know he's, well, nutty, I said miserably, although Ma says he's just getting old. Look, Billy, this isn't going to work. What do you think will happen when Grandpa doesn't see the ghost train? What if he starts crying or something? I don't want the girls to see that. You're always worrying about things, Billy said breezily. It will all work out. Who do you fancy, Mary or Helen? I thought for a moment. Well, if I have to choose between the two of them, it would be Mary. I thought of her shiny black hair and pretty brown eyes. That works for me, Billy said. Let's go see if your grandpa is ready to go. Oh, he's ready, all right. He's been ready for months. We started out after dark. Grandpa said the train came at midnight, but I had to fudge the time a little because I knew Ma would be home by midnight and we needed to be back before then. We walked to Mary's house. She and Helen came out on the porch. Mary's mother followed behind with a little blond boy clinging to her skirt. Hello, Mrs. Davis, I said. This is my grandpa, Mr. Smith. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Davis said. How kind of you to chaperone the girls this evening. I told Mary all about the ghost train. It's no trouble at all, Grandpa said. He took off his cap and held it in his hands. I see you fought in the war, Mrs. Davis said. My father did too. What regiment were you in? I served with the New York 9th Artillery, Grandpa said proudly. They called us Seward's pets after Secretary of State William Seward. Mr. Seward was stabbed in his sickbed by Booth's henchman Lewis Powell at the same time that Booth was shooting President Lincoln in Ford's Theater. What a terrible thing to do, Mrs. Davis said. Oh, Mr. Seward survived, and he ended up buying Alaska a few years later. Did you know that I shook Mr. Lincoln's hand when he came to visit our regiment? You did. How wonderful that must have been, Mrs. Davis exclaimed. I had never heard Grandpa say that he had shaken President Lincoln's hand before. I figured it was time to go before Mrs. Davis realized that Grandpa was a little, well, confused. We better get going, I said quickly. We don't want to miss the train. Such fun, Mrs. Davis said. Have a good time. The night was warm and clear, and the stars sparkled brightly in the dark sky. Billy and Helen hung behind us, talking softly together. Every once in a while, Helen would giggle. Mary and I walked together with Grandpa between us, so we could catch him in case he stumbled and fell. "Are you good in geometry, James?" Mary asked. "Because I really need help with it." "Sure, I can help you, Mary," I said, my heart beating faster. "Maybe you can come to my house after school tomorrow. My mother doesn't work on Saturdays." "Oh, that would be lovely." Mary smiled at me, and I fell in love right there and then. "I need some help with Huckleberry Finn," I said. "All that symbolism and everything." "Tom Sawyer is easier, but I can help you with Huckleberry Finn. It's not so hard once you know what to look for." "Over there," Grandpa shouted suddenly. "The tracks are down there behind the trees." We stepped carefully down the steep embankment to the railroad tracks. Grandpa, Mary, and I stood close to the tracks. Billy and Helen stood a little apart from us, totally lost in each other. I felt very silly. At some point we would have to say the train wasn't coming and leave. I hoped Grandpa wouldn't make a fuss. "Where are all the other people?" Grandpa asked, looking around. "Has everyone forgotten what President Lincoln did for this country? He saved the Union and freed the slaves, you know." "I'm sure they'll come soon, Grandpa." I didn't add that no one was there yet because we were about 2 hours too early. "Are you cold, Mr. Smith?" Mary asked. "You're shivering." Grandpa didn't answer. He was watching the tracks to the east. "Do you see that?" he asked. "The tracks are turning blue. That means the ghost train is coming soon." The tracks looked the same steel gray to me. "I see a light," Billy cried out. "Don't you try to make a fool out of me, boy," Grandpa shouted angrily. "There's no light coming yet." Billy laughed. "I'm getting cold, Billy," Helen giggled. "Let's go to where it's warm." Billy and Helen climbed quickly back up the embankment and disappeared. "Don't go too far," I yelled after them. This night was getting worse and worse. "I'm cold too," Mary said. "Give your sweetheart your jacket, James," Grandpa said. "She's shivering. I can see her breath." Mary smiled at me, so I didn't say anything to Grandpa about him calling her my sweetheart. I gave her my jacket, and she put it on. It looked good on her, although it was much too big. "Don't be scared," Grandpa said to Mary. "No matter what you see, nothing will hurt you." A dark cloud came out of nowhere and covered the bright moon. "It's getting so dark and foggy that I can hardly see anything," Mary said. "There," Grandpa cried out. "There's the light coming right towards us. Step back." I didn't see any light, but Grandpa and Mary were staring at something coming down the tracks. They stepped back from the tracks at the same moment. Mary grabbed my arm and pulled me next to her. "Be careful," she whispered. "Let it pass." "Let what pass?" I asked in bewilderment. "What's happening?" "The pilot train is passing, James," Grandpa said. "Look, the skeleton soldiers are playing their instruments." "The skeleton soldiers?" "They're sitting in a circle, playing black instruments that glow," Mary said. Mary's long hair blew back in a strong breeze that had also just sprung up out of nowhere. "There's the conductor with his black baton. One soldier is playing a flute and another the violin. The drummer is waiting for his turn. Hush, can't you hear the music? It's a funeral dirge." I couldn't see or hear a thing, and I thanked Mary silently for playing along for Grandpa's sake. Then their heads jerked suddenly to the right like they were watching something pass by. "The next train will be the funeral train, carrying the body of President Lincoln," Grandpa said. "Maybe you'll see that one, James." I was confused now. Was there really a ghost train that I couldn't see? More clouds covered the stars, and it got even darker. I could hardly see Grandpa and Mary, who were standing right next to me, let alone a ghost train. "There's another light," Grandpa said in a trembling voice. "Here he comes, James. President Lincoln is coming. See, there's the blue and white headlight on the engine." Mary peered into the darkness. "There it is. The funeral car is draped with black crepe. Oh, there's President Lincoln's coffin. It's covered with the American flag." "They're all here," Grandpa gasped. "I didn't see them before." "Who's all here, Grandpa?" I couldn't tell what he was looking at in the murky darkness. "Don't you see them, James? They're the soldiers of the Civil War come to honor President Lincoln." "Look," he cried out, "there's my comrades Henry and little Ned, and oh, there's cheerful Charlie who lost both his legs at Petersburg. They're all in a line saluting President Lincoln." Grandpa started to weep. He never knew all the good he did. They killed him before he ever knew. He raised a shaking hand and saluted the swirling darkness. The dark clouds passed over the moon, and it became brighter. Grandpa started to slump over like he was about to faint. "We better take him home," Mary whispered. "He doesn't look too good." "What about Billy and Helen?" "Don't worry about them. They'll find their way home, and if not, well, then that's their problem." I'll never know how we managed to get Grandpa home that night. He was so weak that Mary and I had to hold him up the whole way. We gave him some whiskey and put him in bed before Ma got home from work. I was very worried. I should have never taken him to see the ghost train. I tossed and turned all night, dreaming of ghostly soldiers swirling around my bed. "Grandpa's still in bed," Ma said at breakfast the next morning. "He seems very tired today." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Will he be all right? I hope so. He did eat a little oatmeal. I just don't understand what happened. He was fine yesterday. We went to Grandpa's bedroom after we finished eating. He was lying on his back, clutching his blue soldier's cap in his hands. He smiled when he saw us. How are the clocks running today? He asked. Did the time stop for 6 minutes? They do seem to be running a little slow this morning, Pa, Ma said. How are you feeling, Grandpa? I asked. I felt terrible seeing him look so frail. It was all my fault. Don't you worry, James, Grandpa said, as if he were reading my mind. I feel better than I have in years, and it's all thanks to you. I'm just a little tired, that's all. His face crinkled in a wide smile. We had the most wonderful time last night, didn't we, though? I finally took my grandson to see President Lincoln's ghost train. You saw the ghost train last night, Pa? Ma smiled indulgently. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? Oh, it was real all right, Grandpa said. Only this time I saw my comrades saluting President Lincoln. He looked straight at me. I'll be with them the next time the train comes around. No, I shouted. It'll be fine, James, Grandpa said. Don't you worry about me. Did you see the train too? Ma smiled at me, with her let's play along with Grandpa look. My throat closed up, but I managed to say, Not this time, Ma, but I'll keep going until I do. Here's my cap, Grandpa said, holding it out to me. Make sure you wear it when you go. Thanks, Grandpa, I will. I took the cap from him, tears stinging my eyes. Isn't your sweetheart coming to visit you today? He asked. I nodded, trying not to cry. Then go get ready for her. I want to sleep now. He winked at me, settled back in bed, and closed his eyes. Ma and I left his room. I went to the living room, got out my books, and waited for Mary. She arrived a little later, looking fresh and pretty. My heart leapt when I saw her. How's your grandpa today? She asked. Is he feeling better? Not too good. He's tired out from last night. I'm sorry to hear that, Mary said softly. He was so excited when he saw the ghost train. I guess it was too much for him. You were very kind to Grandpa last night, Mary. What do you mean? I mean, pretending to see the ghost train and all. Mary raised her eyebrows. Do you think I was pretending, James? You mean you actually saw the ghost train? We weren't even there at the right time. Mary smiled sweetly. Maybe you'll see it when we go next year, James. Now let's start studying. I bent my head down to open Huckleberry Finn so that she wouldn't see the silly grin that was spreading over my face. I didn't care whether she had seen the ghost train or not. She wanted to see me again, and that's all that mattered.